Hello, and welcome to the Journeys of Folco Hornblower, the One Ring 2nd Edition Strider Mode adventure, written and narrated by me, Ryan Hewlett. Book 3, Extended. It was still a good day's trek to Bree-Hill proper, and a thought crossed Falco's mind. The depths of winter was still a ways away, beside the Rivendell wine he received from Lord Elrond, which was a great gift in its own right. Falco thought he'd best bring something else back for the long winter to his parents, and venison would be a welcoming gift for the upcoming feast during Yule. Of course, it wasn't completely without benefit to Falco, as he'd head to Archet and attempt to hunt deer in the Chetwood. His grandfather had an Archet hunting bow, a fine, high-quality bow that was unparalleled in its craftsmanship. Or so the boyars of Archet proudly said, and from Falco's knowledge they were. Anyone seen with one, you knew for sure that they were a great hunter and a marksman, as the only way to get one of these finely crafted bows was to show your prowess by felling a 10-point deer on a 3-day hunt. The people of Archet guarded their wares with the utmost of pride, so rare indeed should one find an outsider with one in their hands. Falco hoped his grandfather was still remembered by the people of Archet. But that was a time ago, and the people of Archet, even the hobbits that lived there, were wary of anyone from Bree. Reaching the eastern edge of the Chetwood, and having hunted with his grandfather for the better part of his tweens, Falco knew the trails to get to Archet, where others less experienced would be lost. It was late in the afternoon, the late November sun now below the horizon. The forest darkened quickly with the fading light. Folco was not wary, however, as he knew soon the glowing lanterns of Archet would soon be upon him. Sure enough, he soon reached the 20 or so cabins making up the village, in a flat area of partially exposed ground, the large boughs of the trees overhanging and providing some cover over the buildings. Folco had been in Archet many times with his grandfather during their hunting expeditions, but only now noticed that the chimneys of the cabins were positioned in such a way as to be in between the overhanging branches, clearing a way for smoke to rise up and into the sky. Falco proceeded to the only place in town for visitors, aside from the trading post, and that was none other than the Green Fletcher Inn. Falco set Billy along the side, and quickly brushing him down and rubbing his head, he proceeded into the inn. The door opened with a loud creaking, the iron hinges seeming tight against the wood. As Falco entered, all who had been seated at the bar had stopped what they were doing and looked. A brief moment passed, and the patrons all returned to what they were doing. The place was warm, rustic. The room smelled of burning wood that made up most of the Chetwood. "Welcome, traveler. Food, drink, or sleep?" The innkeeper, pouring a pint of ale, asked of Falco. "All three," Falco curtly said. "Grab a seat then where you may. We'll be right with you." Falco now looked around the room and spotted a small table to the side, near the fireplace, and he sat. The patrons at one of the other tables all glanced at Falco, studying him a little more. Falco thought their expressions were one of some confusion. They knew him to be of the Breeland hobbits, but with the recent weeks of travel on the Great East Road, the battle with the troll, the state of his clothing, and his weathered-looking skin of being in the wilds now for some time, they couldn't quite make any sense of it. That's what Falco thought, at least. He sat down and looked about the room. Adorning the mantel of the large stone fireplace was a series of mounted, taxidermized heads of various animals of the Chetwood. Deer, wolf, moose, even a bear. Along the walls of the room were a series of mounted antlers, and Falco could see from the nearest one each had been dated with the name of the hunter who brought back the prize. Each set of antlers were 10 points or more, and Falco now wondered if his grandfather's name appeared on one of the prize trophies. Sure enough, and just behind where he was seated, was his grandfather's name. Falco proudly smiled. "So, what will it be then, Mr.?" the innkeeper now asked of Falco. Falco looked up, the smile still on his face. The special and a pint of ale. Been a while since I felt the warmth of a nice hearth and a plate of hearty food." The innkeeper looked over at Folco. Yes, well, it does appear you must have crawled out of whatever hole you were under. Where'd you come from, anyway? Falco chuckled. Bree-Hill, but it's been a couple months since I've been home. The innkeeper cocked his eyebrow and had an inquisitive look. That explains it, then. You look like someone dragged you through the ringer without washing the clothes first. Very well, then. Special and a drink coming right up. And off he turned and into the inn's kitchen. Falco returned his gaze on the hanging antlers which bore the name of his grandfathers underneath. Falco now wondered if he would be so fortunate to hunt one similar, and have his prize trophy hung here as well. Falco finished the evening with little interruption from either the patrons or the inn's proprietor. Falco soon retired to the simple comfort of the room upstairs after seeing to Billy was safe outside. The simple accommodations, although not like Rivendell's, the Pony, or the Wood's End in Woodhall, were warm, the bed comfortable, and the blankets welcoming. Morning came and the sound of the forest was quiet, with the occasional chopping of wood, sawing of logs, and the shouts from loggers sounding throughout the village. Falco went downstairs for breakfast, and while there he inquired about how to get one of those finely crafted Archet hunting bows. Aye, well, they come at a price, my young lad. A show of your worth. You ain't getting a bow from Archet unless you are apt enough. You see these? The innkeeper points around the room. These represent the only Archet bows to leave this village in the hands of outsiders. You bring in something like that, you get yourself a fine bow indeed. Falco looked around and turned back to the innkeeper and smiled. That it? The innkeeper laughed, as he now slapped the breakfast plate loaded with taters, sausages, and scrambled egg. 10 points and 3 days. Falco grabbed the utensils and proceeded to eat the food. Fair enough. See you in 3. The innkeeper laughed some more and proceeded about his daily routine. Falco finished his meal, and after securing his stay and Billy's in the stables for the next 3 days, Falco went out to see his friend. I'll be gone for a couple of days, my good friend. I've arranged for the nice warm place while I'm gone. Just hunting out here in the wood for a deer, going to get me a fine bow, if I'm lucky. Billy neighed in a joking manner. Falco laughed in return. Oh, it's like that, eh? Well, you go ahead and think that, but I'll be bringing back a nice 10-pointer before you get too comfortable. See you in a few. Taking his bow and quiver, securing his hunting knife and his pack, he went into the Chetwood. Now Falco knew he wasn't the best of hunters, but he knew enough following alongside with his grandfather where to look, what signs to look out for when hunting wild game. Deer were relatively plenty in the Chetwood, but you still had to be very on the watch for the right track, lest they spot you first and prance off, never to be seen again. Falco hadn't expected much on the first day. Maybe a trail here, a tuft of deer fur on the tree or branch there. But he happened on a fresh set of tracks of a seemingly large buck. Falco knew so by the wider front set of prints versus the hind set. His grandfather had shown him the differences between a buck and a doe, and he was now thankful for the time spent on the many hunts previously to him. Falco stayed low and quiet, and being a hobbit, wagered his profile was almost unseen by any cautious animal, and owing to his clothing being dirtied and weathered from the weeks of travel and camp along the Great East Road, his scent was all but impossible to smell, or so he hoped. Either way, Falco thought the advantage was his over his intended prey. The days were now much shorter than he would have liked, and continuing until he could no longer see the trail before him, he found a suitable place to rest for the evening, ready to pick up the trail at the sign of any light. Dawn came and Folco was awakened by the sound of her crackling branches on the ground. What birds were still left in the forest before the onset of winter sang songs throughout. The forest was starting to awaken. He heard the sound again, and carefully and slowly he readied his bow and an arrow. He fortunately set himself up in a fairly large branch earlier as he rested for the evening. Hobbits, after all, were deft at sleeping anywhere, so his position was primed for the kill. The forest brightened under the canopy with a slowly rising sun, and there, Falco saw it. A large but graceful buck stood majestically a distance away from Folco. Folco studied the creature, and with a little more light now breaking through, Folco could count 12 tines. Folco's heart raced with anticipation, but now his grandfather's voice echoed throughout his mind, telling him to calm himself down, breathe in slowly, practice patience. The time to strike will present itself. Folco waited, and in an almost seemingly surreal moment, the large buck casually grazed on the grasses ahead of Folco, moving ever so closely. Minute by minute, Folco had set himself in a perfect shooting position, securely balancing himself high in the branch, using whatever leverage he could from the tree to make his aim steady and true. Slowly and with strength, he pulled back on the bow, and despite the brisk coldness of the late November morning, the wood of his bow did not make a sound. Silent and quiet, Folco's breathing was. Breathing out a deep, slow breath, and having now aimed carefully for the area of the chest where the heart of the creature was, he let go the string, the arrow flying like a diving falcon, straight and deep into the chest of the large buck. The buck jumped at the sudden strike and then keeled over, lifeless from the unsuspecting attack. Folco smiled, but then showed a more sullen expression. He jumped down from the branch and onto the forest floor and walked over to the now slain deer. It was surely a majestic animal, Folco thought. Folco's grandfather always told him to be thankful and pay his respects to any animal he would fell, saying a life is still a life, and Folco just did so. Folco now set up a small camp, and spending the rest of the day and into the evening, prepared the hunted deer for transport back to Archet. It was a large deer, and he took what edible meat he could reasonably carry, roughly 40 pounds, leaving the rest of the carcass for the forest to reclaim. The antlers were large and cumbersome, but, for Folco, outfitted them on his pack, and when strapped across his shoulders, the antlers stood stretched out and completely in front of Folco. Folco chuckled at the thought of what others would see as he walked back into town. Folco left early in the morning, shortly after the dawn, and proceeded back to Archet. No sooner had he entered the village than the commotion had started. "Well, my eyes have never seen such a sight," yelled out an Archet villager. "Hobbits! Who knew they were such hunters? Fierce like the badger they must be," cried out another. "Dare say half the beast is back there in the woods," chuckled another. Folco smiled and nodded and proceeded to the inn. Breaking through the door, everyone now stopped to look towards it. Folco sidestepped inside, the 12 points of the antler too wide to make it through the door. No one made a sound. Turning now to face the innkeeper, Folco proceeded to remove the set of antlers and his pack down on the room floor. "All right, boys, pony up. Come on, all those you wager now. I'll get the others when they come in later." The innkeeper now looked at Folco. "Well there, Mr. Hornblower, that's a mighty fine trophy you got there. Luck or skill, who knows, but that's some fine hunting on ye part." The innkeeper now walking over towards Folco. And I see you dressed the meat yourself. I knew you hobbits were handy in the fields, but by the looks of it, you're quite handy at hunting." After a few more pleasantries, Folco gave some of the venison to the innkeep, and the rest he saved for home. As for the antlers, the innkeep set it aside on the long table near the bar. "Now, you've satisfied one requirement of the bow, but there's still another. I'll call the forester to come have a look. He'll want to speak with you. Still one more requirement yet before you take your leave with an Archet bow," the innkeeper now sternly saying to Folco. Folco showed some confusion on his face. I see. Very well. I'll take my leave in the room until they arrive." Folco retired to his hired accommodations. Morning passed, and after lunch the Forester of Archet arrived. Walking towards the bar, and the innkeeper of the inn spoke in a curt manner. "Where's this would-be hunter I'm hearing about?" The innkeeper motioned over to Folco, who by this time was just finishing up his lunch, sitting over by the hearth under the set of trophy antlers from the hunt his grandfather did many years earlier. The forester looked over to Folco, cocked his brow in a sense of bewilderment, and then walked over. "The name's Talltree, and I'm the Forester of Archet. Who be you?" standing now near the table Falco was sitting at. Falco casually laid down his teacup, wiped his mouth and face with a cloth, and looked up towards the Forester. Folco Hornblower, his face and voice stern in response to Fitch Talltree. The Forester shifted his eye up and over to the wall behind Falco, noticing the nameplate. He gave a slight smirk and motioned to sit down across from Falco. Falco nodded in approval. A hunter indeed. It's been a time since a halfling has come hunting in these woods to fetch one of our bows. Now turning his head and motioning the innkeeper to bring some ale over for both he and Falco. And by the looks of it, seems you may have been bested the previous. Falco looked up at the mounted antlers, the engraved name of his grandfather, and turning back to the Forester. He taught me everything I know about wilds, and it is by luck, and luck alone, that I may have bested him. I am by no means a hunter as he was. Either way, you've shown your worth. Now, I have a little proposition for you, and in turn, you'll get one of our finely crafted bows. The innkeeper now placed the filled mugs of ale on the table, and walked back to the bar. What's the proposition? Falco now taking the mug in hand, raising it, and saying a greeting of cheers. I am in need of a capable hunter to join me on a hunt. Before you agree, I must warn you it'll be very dangerous and difficult to fell the beast to be hunted. Talltree now looking at Falco intensely, Falco nodding for him to continue. Fitch Talltree brushed down his unruly wild beard, and as he looked to Falco, his fierce eyes softened a little. Nigh about 10 years ago now, the former Forester of Archet and I went out to hunt a brutal troll threatening the village itself. On hearing about the troll, Falco's ears perked up, and now listened more intently to the Forester's words. Unfortunately, the Forester then was felled by the beast. He tried to save me from its brutal attack with his club. I was able to escape, but the Forester unfortunately did not. The village placed me then in charge of protecting the village ever since, and I've been waiting for the right time to hunt this creature once again. I believe that time is now, Mr. Hornblower, and although I wouldn't have guessed a halfling to be the one, fate, it would seem, wanted you to be here. Talltree now took his mug of ale and swallowed the point down whole, then slamming it down on the table with a thud. Falco nodded his head, the image of the troll from the troll shaws which he and Eridan had felled a month past, clearly in his mind's eye. Troll, you say? Just so happens, with the help of another, felled one lurking about the east road south of the troll shaws, just a month ago, on my way back here to Bree. Falco saw now in Fitch Talltree a slight sense of amazement, and the one of hope, as he smirked again under his beard at Falco. Talltree now sat back in his chair, arm rest against the back. I'd scarcely believe a story like that coming from a halfling, if it weren't for that 12-point rack on the table there. But you don't have to look like the rest of them. You've already seen your fair share of the wilds, that I can tell for sure. Talltree now leaned forward, arms resting at the table. It's too late now. Winter and Yule is soon upon us. But with the first sign of spring, your bow will be ready, and we'll go out on the hunt. Do we have a deal? Talltree now held out his large, calloused hands towards Falco. Falco paused for a brief moment, and held out his hand in response. I didn't come here to leave empty-handed, that is for sure. You have a deal, Forester Talltree. Falco now knew the Archet hunting bows were unparalleled in the craftsmanship by any man, or hobbit, within leagues of Bree. And if it required the felling of a troll, then by all means he'd help it to see it done. Excellent. Come back to Archet at the first thawing. Take care, Mr. Hornblower, and when you return, your bow will be ready. Standing, Fitch Talltree slapped Falco's back and then walked out to the inn, but not before agreeing to pay for Falco's stay now and for the next time. The innkeeper nodded, and as the Forester walked out, looked over to Falco. Well, my lad, ye's sure full of surprises. Never met a hobbit quite like you. The innkeeper laughed as he went about his routine. Falco picked up the mug of ale, looked down at the reflection of his face in the liquid, and said to himself, What have you gotten yourself into now, Folco? Taking the mug up to his mouth, he chugged the last of the pint. Folco, with Billy in tow, made his way from Archet and back to Bree-Hill. Winter now was finally starting to set in, with a blanket of snow settling down and covering the tops of the trees, the hedge and green of Bree turning white, and the smoke billowing out of each chimney from every building and hobbit hole throughout. Folco set Billy behind his family home and walked in the back door and into the kitchen. Falco's mother standing setting his place at the table. She looked over to Folco, now standing straight and proper, a sullen smile on his face. She smiled, and with restrained happiness said, "Welcome home."
We will continue the journeys of Folco Hornblower next time. If you like the story and the content I'm creating, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Also, check out my other videos called Riddles in the Dark, where I attempt to review and describe the rules of the One Ring RPG for new and experienced players alike. And check out my Substack, a companion to this YouTube channel, where I'll be posting various behind-the-scenes information about the campaign, session notes, and other items related to the game. You can find the link in the video description below. Thank you for watching. Cheers.